All right, let's jump right in and talk about RAID, redundant array of independent disks.
Sounds pretty complex.
It can be, yeah, but it's also pretty cool when you think about what it's doing. Basically, it's all about how you make multiple hard drives work together.
Like a team.
Yeah, exactly. And depending on how you set them up, they can either give you a huge boost in performance or make your data much safer, or sometimes even both.
So how many ways are there to configure these RAID setups?
Well, that's where RAID levels come in.
Oh.
Each level has its own sort of strategy. It's like choosing different team formations depending on if you want to play offense or defense.
Interesting. So what would be a good example of one of these levels?
Okay, so let's start with RAID 0. This one's all about speed, like pure speed.
Okay, speed. I like it. How does it work?
Well, it uses something called striping.
Hmm.
Basically, it splits your data up and spreads it across all the drives in the array. So instead of just reading or writing from one drive, you're doing it from multiple drives at the same time.
So it's like parallel processing for your hard drives.
Exactly. And that means you get insanely fast read and write speeds, which makes it perfect for, say, video editing,
Yeah.
where you're working with massive files and every second counts.
That makes sense. But I'm guessing there's a trade-off here.
You got it. RAID 0 has zero redundancy.
Zero. Like none.
None. If one drive fails, you lose all your data. It's like building a super fast race car, but forgetting the brakes.
Oh, so it's like high risk, high reward.
Exactly. You get the speed, but you got to be really careful about backups.
Got it. So what about a setup that's more focused on the safety of the data?
Well, that's where RAID 1 comes in. It's all about mirroring.
Mirroring.
Yeah, you're basically creating an exact copy of your data on two drives. So if one drive kicks the bucket, the other one has got your back.
Like a backup, but live.
Pretty much. It's great for things like financial records or anything where you absolutely can't afford to lose any data.
I can see how that would be useful, but what's the downside?
Well, you're essentially having your storage space because one drive is just a mirror of the other. And it can be a bit slower than some other setups because it has to write everything twice.
Okay, so you trade some speed and capacity for that extra safety.
Exactly. It all comes down to your priorities.
So is there like a middle ground, something that balances speed and security?
Well, that brings us to RAID 5, which tries to do just that. It uses striping, like RAID 0, for speed, but it also adds something called parity.
Parity, what's that?
It's like a special mathematical code spread across all the drives. If one drive fails, the parity data can be used to rebuild the missing information.
So it's like a built-in safety net.
Exactly. RAID 5 gives you decent speed, fault tolerance, meaning it can handle one drive failure, and it's pretty efficient with storage space. It's kind of like a good all-arounder.
Sounds like a good option for, say, a small business that needs to keep their data safe, but also needs things to run smoothly.
Yeah, something like that. Or even like a website.
Right, where you need to be able to access things quickly, but you also can't afford to lose customer data.
Okay, now let's talk about the big leagues RAID 10.
Ooh, this sounds serious.
This one's like the ultimate combo. It combines the mirroring from RAID 1 with the striping from RAID 0.
Wow, so you get both speed and security.
Exactly. It's the best of both worlds. But of course, that comes at a price. You need at least 4 drives to set it up, so it can get expensive.
Makes sense. So this would be for mission critical stuff, right?
Yeah.
Where even a little bit of downtime is a big problem?
Yeah, think like financial institutions, maybe scientific research, anything that needs high performance and rock-solid reliability.
This RAID stuff is pretty cool. You can really customize it to fit your needs.
Absolutely. And those are just the main ones. There are even more RAID levels and configurations out there.
Really? Like what?
Well, there are things like RAID 6, which is even more robust than RAID 5. Or you can even combine different RAID levels into something called nested RAID, like RAID 50 or RAID 60.
Sounds like things can get pretty complex.
Oh yeah, they definitely can. But the point is that RAID gives you a lot of flexibility to create a storage system that works exactly the way you need it to.
It's almost like you're building your own little data fortress.
That's a good way to put it. And that's the beauty of RAID. You're not stuck with just one way of doing things. You can tailor it to your specific needs and budget.
So how do you figure out which RAID level is right for you?
Well, there are a few things to consider. First, think about what kind of data you're dealing with. Is it critical stuff, or is it something you could easily replace?
It makes sense. Like family photos are more important than, I don't know, that spreadsheet from 2018.
Right. Then think about how you use your data. Do you need to access it constantly and quickly, or is it more like an archive?
Then, of course, budget is always a factor.
Absolutely. RAID can get pricey, especially if you're going for the really high-end setups. But the good news is you can always start with something simple and upgrade later on as your needs change. You're not locked into one RAID level forever.
That's good to know. So RAID seems pretty important for anyone who's serious about their data, whether it's for work or personal use.
Yeah, and the cool thing is the basic principles behind RAID,
Mhm.
striping for speed, mirroring for redundancy, parity for fault tolerance, those are still super relevant even as technology changes.
So even though hard drives might eventually become a thing of the past, the ideas behind RAID will probably stick around.
Exactly. It's all about finding ways to make your data faster, safer, and more reliable, no matter what the future holds.
And who knows what the future holds? Maybe we'll see these same principles applied to entirely different types of storage.
Maybe RAID in the cloud or something like that.
Exactly. The possibilities are endless.
Okay, so we've talked about the most popular RAID setups, RAID 0, 1, 5, and 10, but that's not all.
Oh, there's more.
You bet. There are some less common RAID levels out there.
Like what?
Well, think of RAID 6 as RAID 5, but even safer. It uses two sets of parity data instead of just one.
So it can handle two drives failing.
Exactly. Talk about peace of mind, right?
Wow, that's impressive. But I guess that extra safety comes at a cost.
Yeah, it's a bit more complex to set up, and it can be a little slower because of the extra parity calculations.
So it's probably not something you'd use for everyday stuff.
Right. RAID 6 is usually reserved for like really critical systems where data loss is just not an option.
Like a air traffic control or something?
Yeah, maybe something like that.
Okay, so RAID 6 is like the super safe option. Anything else?
Well, there are also things called nested RAID levels.
Nested RAID.
Yeah, it's kind of like combining different RAID levels together. For example, RAID 50. That's basically a bunch of RAID 5 arrays striped together.
Ooh, so it's like RAID 5 on steroids?
Pretty much. You get the speed of striping with the redundancy of RAID 5, but on a much larger scale.
So you could have like a ton of drives all working together.
Exactly. And you can even do RAID 60, which is basically the same idea, but with RAID 6 arrays instead of RAID 5.
Okay, so you can get pretty creative with these combinations.
Yeah, you really can.
Yeah.
But the more complex you make it, the more difficult it becomes to manage and troubleshoot.
So it's like you got to know what you're doing if you're going to mess around with these advanced setups.
Right, yeah, definitely. But the flexibility is there if you need it.
So with all these different RAID levels, how do you figure out which one is right for you?
Well, the first thing to think about is your data. What kind of data are you dealing with?
Right, because some data is more important than others.
Exactly.
Hmm.
If it's something critical like financial records or customer data, you'll want a RAID level that prioritizes redundancy and safety.
But if it's like temporary files or something that you can easily replace, maybe speed is more important.
Right. And then you also have to think about how you use your data. Do you need to access it constantly and quickly? Or is it more like an archive where speed isn't as critical?
So it's a balance between how important the data is, how you use it, and probably how much you're willing to spend.
Yeah, budget is definitely a factor too.
Hmm.
RAID can get expensive,
Hmm.
especially with more drives and more complex setups.
Makes sense, but it sounds like it's a worthwhile investment if you really care about your data.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And the good news is you can always start with a simpler setup and then upgrade later if you need to.
Okay, that's good to know. So what about the future of RAID? Is it going to be around forever?
Well, that's a good question. Hard drives might not always be the dominant storage technology, but the core principles of RAID, like striping for speed and mirroring for redundancy, those ideas are pretty fundamental.
So even if the hardware changes, the concepts might still apply.
Exactly. It's all about finding the best ways to manage and protect our data, no matter what form it takes.
So maybe we'll see RAID in the cloud or something like that.
Yeah, who knows? The possibilities are pretty exciting.
Definitely.
It really is amazing to think about.
Yeah.
Those basic ideas behind RAID, the striping, the mirroring, that parity stuff, it's all pretty clever when you think about it.
Yeah, they were definitely onto something when they came up with this whole RAID concept.
And the best part is there's no one right answer. You know what I mean? The best RAID level, it really just depends on what you need it for.
Totally. It's all about figuring out your priorities and picking the setup that fits like your specific situation.
Exactly. So whether you're, I don't know, a gamer who wants the absolute fastest load times or a business owner trying to protect all their important files, RAID has got you covered.
It's all about making those smart choices and keeping your data safe and sound.
Well said. And that's what we're all about here, helping you understand this stuff so you can make the best decisions for your own data. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of RAID.
It's been fun.